evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to another edition of What's Happening. I'm George Binns, and I'm here with my co-host, Elliot Margolis. And we have as our guest this evening, Cindy Baez. And she's got a long title, which is Beverly Police Department Domestic Violence Unit Director. Did I get all that right?
Yes.
Okay. So if somebody's really interested in what the domestic violence unit does, the Beverly Police Department website, which you can get through the city website, beverlymass.gov, has a nice long description of lots of things that you do. And I guess when I started looking at it, thinking about this discussion, the first thing that came to mind was started the outfit in 2002 and made the comment in there of a growing epidemic of domestic violence cases within the city of Beverly. So I guess the issue I have is I read the police blotter every day, and I don't see a lot of references to domestic violence. So what's the real story? How serious a problem is it?
I've gotten, I would say there's about at least one a day of a report for domestic violence. Last year we had 345 calls for service for the year. So that's pretty significant amount of calls for service for domestic violence in a city like Beverly, right? Because it's not a huge city, but there is a problem.
Well, how many people do you have in the unit to take care of these calls a day?
So it's myself at the moment. I usually have an intern who helps me during the school years or the school year from September to May. This year I don't have an intern because of the pandemic, but I usually do have an intern. I myself am the one who runs the program, and I am the one who works with a majority of the folks. Some don't want services, which is okay, but they do get a follow-up call, and they have my information in case they do want services in the long run. They can call me.
Okay. And I noticed in the write-up, you also are their legal advocate.
Yes.
So are you a lawyer or?
I am not a lawyer, but I've been doing this work for so long that I know a lot about what goes on with restraining orders, or when they have to meet with the district attorney's office, or the process of what goes on when there's a restraining order, a harassment order, the process of when there's a trial coming up, or a dangerousness hearing. So I kind of know what the process of what happens, but I can't tell you what the outcome is, but I can let them know this is what the process is, just so that they're aware of what's going to happen. They're not blindsided by, going in and having to go up and testify. And they're not blindsided by questions or the way that the court works. So I help them kind of navigate what's going to happen.
So you're sort of a legal coach?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
If you get a call about domestic violence,
Mm-hmm.
how many police officers go to that call? Is it 1, 2, 3?
Two.
Two.
There's a policy in place. When there's a domestic violence call, 2 officers should be there. And sometimes a supervisor will go out as well. So there'll be three officers on scene.
You hear in the news all the time that domestic violence is one of the most dangerous things that a police officer can do.
Mm-hmm.
Has there been any real dangerous situations in Beverly?
In the 4 years that I've been here, no, there has been potentially dangerous situations, but there hasn't been any of our officers have been injured. There have been some that the officers could have potentially been injured, but because they do have that policy in place, I feel like they're kind of prepared for those calls, and they're pretty good at two officers going usually when there's a domestic violence call, and I'm sure that they take every precaution necessary. But there have been several cases where it could have potentially been not the greatest situation for a police officer.
Are all the police officers in Beverly trained for domestic violence issues?
Yes, they have to do a training during their police training that they do. There is a training that happens for them. Yes.
Well, obviously, you don't go on the call with the officers, correct?
No, I have gone on calls after everything has happened to do a follow-up with a police officer in the home of a survivor, but it's usually not it's usually not like that. I usually don't go in to homes just for my own safety because of the risk and the danger of myself going into a home. And I'm not a police officer, I'm a civilian. So I do more of the follow-up rather than, right in the moment when things are happening. I don't go to those calls now.
Well, when you go on one of these follow-ups, do you have a police officer with you?
Yes, I do.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
Have you had repeat offenders?
Yes, I have.
Okay, and how do you deal with that? I mean, if they break a restraining order or they go back to the home and then a couple weeks later they do the same thing all over again, how do you deal with that?
I'm there more for the survivor. So the offender, I don't have any contact. I don't work with them. The survivor, it's totally up to them what they want to do. I can't make a survivor leave a relationship. There are many different reasons why, and it's their choice. I would like to give them the autonomy of being able to leave the relationship when they're ready and safe to leave the relationship. If I have a client, which has happened lots of times, where a client is not ready, they leave the relationship, but then they go back to the relationship, and that's okay. I just basically am there to safety plan and hopefully make it safer while they're in the home. And then, if they decide to leave again, then I'm totally there for them to fall back on. I will, definitely go and help them navigate the court system again. So it's really not about like what I feel. It's about what the client feels and when they're ready. What they want to do, and then I just kind of follow the lead and help them safety plan and help them navigate the court system and give them that support that they need at that moment. So it's some cases they do go back, some they don't. That's totally up to the survivor.
Well, when they leave a relationship, where do they go?
Some of them stay home. Some of them do go into shelters. Some of them move out with their families. Some of them have plan already of what they want to do when they leave, which is ideal. It's very dangerous to leave a domestic violence relationship. That's one of the high risk times in a relationship is when they leave. So it's better if they do have a plan to leave. Sometimes they don't because it happens in the spur of the moment and they have to think quick on their feet and kind of get out. But there are many different ways that they could do that. They could go into a domestic violence shelter. They can go move with family members. They can stay in the home. And then, if they do get a restraining order, the offender has to leave the home, and then the offender can't come within 1,000 yards of the home. So, and that would give the survivor some time to plan on their next steps. So there's different ways and avenues that they could take. It just depends on what they prefer.
Well,
What
where's
percentage
this domestic violence shelter? Is there one in Beverly?
There isn't one in Beverly. There are many out there. Most of them are undisclosed shelters. Hawk has a shelter, and that's an undisclosed location as well. But there is a state database, Massachusetts state database called SafeLink, where you can call and see where, if they have any availability anywhere, and the SafeLink will give you the phone number that you can call, and then the survivor can do a kind of like an intake to see if they're a fit for that shelter.
How often is the abused person a man as opposed to the abused person being a woman?
It's more women, but there are men. So this week, I think I had one male, as opposed to probably like 7 females. So there are males. Of course, it happens to anyone. So I really don't know the statistics, but it does happen to male. They say that 1 in 4 women will be in an intimate partner violence relationship, and 1 in 7 men will be in an intimate partner violence relationship. So, it varies, but there are males that go through domestic violence.
Okay. I'm aware of a safe house in Gloucester because I used to be on the board of directors. Do you ever send anybody to the place in Gloucester?
No, I usually go through SafeLink or Hawk. I usually go through either of them. If there is availability in the Gloucester, I'm sure that SafeLink is probably linked up to them, or Hawk is linked up to them.
I know Hawk is.
Yeah. So if there's not, if there's availability, Hawk is going to let me know there's availability here. Have your client call and see if they're a good fit for that shelter.
One of the things that's on the list of the domestic violence issues is warrant apprehension team. Now, how do you get involved in that? I would imagine that would be strictly police officers to go knock on the door and hand somebody a warrant and take them away.
Yes, I don't get involved in that. That's not something that I would do. I do more of the follow-up.
So when we talk about a domestic violence unit, excuse me, it's more than just you.
Yes.
So there are police officers involved indirectly?
Mm-hmm. So what would happen then if there was a warrant, right? And the police officers go and serve a warrant, and there is grave concerns, I will get an email from the police officer. I will get phone calls from the police officer. If they go out to a home and they see that there is severe violence in the home, I will get a phone call right then and there for me to speak to the survivor at the moment. So that's kind of like how the unit works is if there is a grave concern, a police officer will reach out to me and have me speak to the survivor on scene so that I can safety plan with the survivor. There's been instances where police officers have brought the survivor to the police department. I go into the police department and speak to the survivors and see what their next steps are and safety plan with them and help them kind of navigate what it is that they want to do and what's the safest plan for them.
It must be a kind of a frustrating job to see all this type of abuse on people. How do you convince somebody that they should leave or get out of the relationship because of the abuse? I mean, I assume you go through them, talk to them about the history, how many times it's happened, and things like that.
Yeah.
But you have no authority to just force them out?
No, I don't. And I honestly don't want that authority. I would rather the survivor make their own choices, because a survivor knows their life better than I do. I'm there, they've been in this relationship for many years, and I just come in to speak to someone probably 45 minutes. I can't make decisions on someone's life. Being there just 40 minutes. I wouldn't try to convince anyone to do anything. I basically give them options. I let them know what could happen, what may happen. These are your options. And then the survivor chooses what's best for them. So I don't really try to convince anyone. It can be, I wouldn't say frustrating. I would say, kind of like a feeling of you're worried for the safety of your clients, but I don't really get frustrated with my clients, but I do worry for their safety. And it's totally up to them what their decisions are, what they want to do, what they think is best for them, what's the safest thing for them to do. And then we talk about that, and then we do a safety plan around it. But I don't really try to convince anyone to do anything.
Do you ever talk to the offender?
I don't. No.
Would that or would that not be helpful to talk to the offender to find out what the survivor, what does to make that offender do what they did?
That's a totally whole different area. An offender would have to go and get their own services. I would talk to the survivor and give the survivor information on where the offender could go to get services, but I wouldn't necessarily talk to the offender to give them services. It's totally different. I feel like you can't work with both. You only could really work with one, because you want to keep all of the information that your client is telling you confidential, because it could be unsafe for them if you were to say something that the offender would get upset about. So I totally don't talk to offenders, but I will give my clients information for the offenders to get services through, the intimate partner education program, which used to be called the Batterers program, or helping them find other services, a therapist or something where they could go and get services for themselves. But when it comes to me and the services I provide, they're all for the survivor.
Yeah, I can imagine it would be very dicey if you were trying to negotiate between the two of them, because one of them is going to say, hey, you're on his side or you're on her side.
Well, I was thinking more like of marriage counseling. You have the two of them together and you talk things out. And I didn't know if maybe you ever did that.
Yeah, no, and even that, marriage counseling, when there's a domestic violence relationship, that is not ideal either. It's better for them to have their own therapist, because of the same reasons that George said. You can kind of corner a survivor, and the clinician could side with the abuser, but the clinician could also side with the survivor. And then it just makes a really unsafe situation when they go back home.
It turns into a competition of who can get the right answer out of the clinician.
Yes.
So I guess what it comes down to is a typical scenario starts off that a 911 call goes into the police department, and it's identified as a domestic violence. 2 officers are sent to the scene, and do they remove the offender automatically, or what's next?
If there's a criminal charge, yes, they do remove the offender. And usually offenders have to stay incarcerated at least 6 hours to give the survivor time to kind of make a plan of what they want to do. There are some cases where the offender has to stay incarcerated until the next day until they see a judge in court. So there are cases where there is a domestic report that goes in for an argument, and they can't. Police officers can't arrest someone for having an argument, but they can arrest someone if there's an assault.
How often are kids involved?
It varies. There are cases that I have that are definitely, there's kids involved, but I do have cases where they're younger and they don't have kids. I do have cases where they're older and their kids are older adults. So it kind of varies when it comes to intimate partner violence. It doesn't, there's no real answer to like how many, calls there are kids involved, but there are some that do have kids and some don't.
And if the survivor decides to leave, they can take their kids with them?
Yes. So restraining orders do have a section where you can put your children on, and they'll give temporary custody to the non-offending person. So that they can do that through restraining orders, but through district court, but you would have to go into probate court sometimes to get 100% physical and legal custody of your children, depending on what the judge decides. But they can take their children, and that can get dicey too, depending if they've been at probate court and there's already a court order in place, and someone is in a domestic violence relationship, but the offender has custody of the kids. The non-offender wouldn't be able to take the kids if there's a court order in place, unless they go to the court and they get a restraining order, and on the restraining order, the kids are put on there. So it can get a little shaky when it comes to, court orders and child custody. But if there's nothing in place at the time of the assault and a non-offender goes into the court to get a restraining order, they can add their children onto that restraining order, giving them temporary custody of the children.
This thing gets complicated very quickly, doesn't it?
It does get complicated. That's why they have me, so that I can explain all of this to survivors, because it can get overwhelming, right? Like you're in a relationship, something happens, an assault happens, you're trying to get out of the relationship, you don't really know much about restraining orders, you don't know what happens in the court system, you're not exactly sure what happens in a criminal case, so it can be very overwhelming, and that's where I step in to try and help the survivor understand what's going to happen and walk them step by step so that they're not feeling alone, they're not feeling overwhelmed, and they do have support.
Well, if I can go back to my hypothetical for a second. The 911 call goes in, the two police officers show up, there is an assault, they take the offender away. And you said they can hold him for 6 hours. Do you then go in immediately?
I have sometimes, not into the home. I have gone to the police department. I have gone into the hospital, and I've safety planned with folks. I've helped them understand what's happening, and then they make their decision on what it is that they want to do. Some stay, and some decide to leave.
Well, it sounds like you got a 6 hour window to make an awful lot of decisions, or the survivor has a 6 hour window to make an awful lot of decisions and take action on whatever they think they want to do. It gets to be kind of difficult, I think.
Yeah, and I mean, within that 6 hours, if they decide they want to get a restraining order, that's where, they get the restraining order. The offender has to stay away at least 100 yards. So you have that, they can't contact them by phone. They can't do a third party contact. So there's no contact with the non-offender and the offender. And that will help the non-offender kind of, make a long-term decision on what's going to happen. And we got to think too, like a restraining order is it's a piece of paper. It doesn't work for everybody. It could potentially put a survivor in more harm by getting the restraining order than actually helping them. So again, that goes back to speaking with the survivor, seeing what the survivor needs, letting them make their own decisions, and then, helping them navigate those decisions that they're making.
So once they get a restraining order and somebody violates the restraining order, what happens next?
There could be a magistrate hearing where you go in and speak to a magistrate to see if they would consider it a violation, or there could be an arrest for the violation.
Okay. Well, as I see from the clock, we're running out of time. Is there any final words you'd like to add to the discussion?
I would like to add, resources for survivors. If you are in a domestic violence relationship and you are seeking help, you are more than welcome to give me a call. I work with Beverly residents. Phone number for my office is 978-922-1155. You also have the Safe Link, which is the Massachusetts database for shelters, which is 877-785-2020. And then Hawk, where it's the North Shore, and they have shelter that they have available. They have support groups. They have legal clinics. So they have different things that I necessarily cannot have here at the police department. So if you'd like to get information from them, their phone number is 978-744-8552, and their hotline number is 800-547-1649.
Elliot, any final words?
No, I'm good. This was fascinating. It's interesting to see that we have these services, and unfortunately, they're utilized all too often. That's the scary part. And when I was on the board of directors of the place in Gloucester, it was brutal. Very difficult to see that people actually do this to each other.
Yeah.
So I applaud you for your work. I think it's great and definitely needed.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for watching, and we'll have more shows along this line of what else do the police do besides, stand around on the street corner. And again, thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We'll see you next time. And we stopped recording.
Thank you for having me on. I appreciate it.
I guess the next
good.
question
I think people need to know that you are available for this, because there's probably people that don't know it.
Yes. I try. I try to get out and give people my information and business cards, and I go out and do trainings to facilities just so that they know that I'm here. It's been a little bit more difficult with the coronavirus pandemic, but I try to get out there as much as I can.
Yeah, that's one of the things I forgot to ask is the problem gotten worse because of the virus and the lockdowns?
Well, to answer your question, just so that you're aware, I feel like there hasn't been an uptick yet. But I do feel that we will have an uptick once the pandemic is subsiding, hopefully pretty soon, and people are able to get out and say this is happening to me. But right now they're probably isolated and they can't get out, and they could be quarantined at home. They could be unemployed at home with their offender, and it doesn't give them the opportunity to go out and say anything.
So what did I forget to ask you?
Well, now, do you have a psychology degree?
I don't. Social work.
Social work. Okay, so that pretty well covers what you need to have. I was just wondering about that. But that's a tough job.
Yeah,
Are you going to have an office in the new police station?
I am.
Very
I
good.
will. Yes.
Very good. It's do you have an office in the one we have now?
I don't. It's an off-site office.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Probably no room for you.
There isn't. It's tiny. There's not room for a lot of, police officers and personnel.
Yeah. I don't know if I'd want to be a police officer dealing with domestic violence. I mean, you hear on the news so many times that guns are involved.
Yeah. Yeah.
Well, there was a case in Texas where 2 police officers were responding to a domestic violence, and they got ambushed and killed along the way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So it's
Scary.
nasty, scary. Yeah. Well,
I
thanks
wouldn't
again.
want to be a police officer at all. Go to any of the calls.
Well, the thing is, I've had a couple of instances talking to the police. We have a pretty darn good police force in Beverly.
You do. We do. I am probably I don't know of any other police department that has a domestic violence advocate on their team in the North Shore. I don't know of any other one. Beverly Police Department is the only police department that has a domestic violence advocate on their team.
Oh,
That's interesting.
Yes.
we need to do another show for all the stuff we forgot. Yeah. No, seriously, I think we probably should revisit this sometime in the near future
Mm-hmm.
to
And
emphasize.
George, I was talking about possibly having a survivor on here where they could talk about the work that the domestic violence unit does
and,
on their perspective.
The thing with that, sometimes survivors are concerned about their identity.
So we
And-
talked about silhouetting them and then changing their voice.
We've done that.
Yes.
It's already done a show where they had the survivor totally blacked out
Yeah.
with a fictitious name.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, that's really
Change
easy
the
to do
name,
on
change the
Zoom.
voice.
Yeah. Hey, if you can line one up, let me know and we'll have another show.
All right. That sounds good.
Yeah.
I'll reach out to
Yeah.
my clients to see who would be willing or able to do the show.
Yeah.
One other quick question.
Mhm.
Are drugs involved in a lot of these cases?
Drugs and alcohol. Yes, pretty much. But some cases, some there aren't, but there are a pretty significant amount that there's drug and alcohol.
What about income? Is there a big disparity between low income and high income people with this type of an issue?
No, actually, no. I've had folks who you would never believe that that they would be in a domestic violence relationship because they're very well off and wealthy, and then I have some who are low income. So there's not really a difference, but a lot of my clients do come from lower income communities. Yes.
Yeah. These are questions. That's why we could have done another 30 minutes.
Yeah. Yeah, low income environment is very stressful for lots of reasons. It shows up in the COVID cases, among other things. Yeah.
Yeah.
All righty. Well, thanks again. And Zoom is about to cut us off, so we'll do it again. And like you said, if you can get a client who's willing to become anonymous, we'll do another show whenever you're ready.
All right. That sounds good. I'll reach out, George.
It was
Thank you.
nice meeting
All
you.
right, thank
Cindy.
you. Thank you. Take care.